Welcome to Working Smarter, Concise Compliance Conversations, featuring Wendy Rubis, sponsored by Village MD, primary care physicians, practice medicine the way you've always wanted, data, resources, and clinical decision support to care for your patients inside and outside the exam room.
Hi, welcome to Working Smarter. I'm Wendy Rubis, General Counsel of Village MD, and today it's a great pleasure to tell you that we're talking about an exciting new program at a CMS, and I have two of the best people in the country to talk to about that. So it's a pleasure to introduce you to first Gary Jacobs. Those of you that work with Village may know Gary. He's technically the president of our at-home program, which is an exciting new program bringing care to people who really need it in their home. But in addition to that hat, he is also the executive leader of our public affairs program and has done amazing work there in a very short period of time. Such a pleasure to have you with us today, Gary.
Thank you, Wendy.
In addition, we are thrilled to have with us Dave Ault. Dave is an attorney at Faegre, Baker & Daniels. He's an advisor and consultant to Village MD, and his background is that he comes from the CMS Innovation Center, where he oversaw amazing changes and transformation, some of the things we've been talking about on this podcast over time, including some ACO models and other initiatives. Such a pleasure to have you with us today, Dave. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. I mean, I love talking about this stuff, but more importantly, I've always wanted to have an avatar, so I feel a lot cooler today than I have in a long time.
Well, what we're here for is to make you guys feel cool. So, yes, we love your avatars as well. It's just so great to have you. So, Gary, do you want to start us off?
Yes, thank you, Wendy. The public affairs program at Village is really to work with the regulatory and legislative branches of government to focus on primary care in bills that are being contemplated and new initiatives out of CMS that are being contemplated. What we've learned over the years is that if we're proactive in that process, we can generally have success in making sure that things that are important to us in structure and design of these programs is reflected in the final product as produced by either a new law or in regulation or in demonstration authority of CMS.
Being at Village and seeing the way CMS is now really recognizing the value of primary care and understanding, it's almost like they're reading from our playbook. I've said that before. Really, truly understanding the work that we're doing. This primary care initiative, if you're watching at home, you can see we've got some information about the primary care initiative and how central it is, both to what Village is doing, but importantly to our patients and to the healthcare system.
Exactly. And we'll continue to be doing that work, but I just wanted to start with that and then turn over to Dave in the first slide.
Most importantly to this conversation, Parts A and B of Medicare, which is the traditional Medicare program, we're structured on a fee-for-service or a pay-for-volume-based system. And so what we've seen over the past several years is a big shift, volume to paying for value. The next step in the progression of getting providers to be able to get back to really practicing medicine and interacting with patients and trying and worrying less about how many patients they need to see or how much time they have to spend with each patient.
So we sort of show it as a left turn on the slide, and we say, okay, now we're at the point where we're really looking at value. And we know that we've had Medicare Advantage. We know we've seen the performance bonus payment system, the ACOs, but really I was thinking about pop-up video. Remember VH1 pop-up video? This is like a new pop-up here. This is like an improved, a change for the better, in my opinion. ACOs was a good start, but this is like improved.
Absolutely, because with the, while ACOs were a great start in getting us away from fee-for-service, ACOs didn't really strengthen the connection between patients and their doctors. And so ACOs initially could sort of exist in the background. And so it is putting the patient back at the center of it and letting them be a consumer and know what they're getting involved with. And in doing so, building a stronger bond with their doctors.
So let's move to, why don't you guys tell us a little bit about what this program is?
So these models, you've heard maybe 5 new models. It really falls into 2 models and then a few buckets within those models. This primary care first model is the next step in the comprehensive primary care line of models and is, again, focused really on the primary care practice. And we'll get into more detail in a second. The second model is the direct contracting model. And the best way to think of that is it's just a rebranding of an ACO model. So the most advanced model right now is the next generation ACO model or next gen. And this is just the next gen. And while it's being called direct contracting, and while instead of being called an ACO, the entities are going to be called direct contracting entities, it's really just the same person in new clothes and sort of a buttoned up version of ACOs, but taking the next step in responsibility and risk. And it will operate alongside the permanent ACO program, which is the Medicare Shared Savings Program, and will be sort of comparable to the most advanced track of that program, which is called the Enhanced Shared Savings Program.
Got it.
So, Gary, do you want to talk about the Village MD?
So our whole public affairs initiative is focused on primary care and its evolution, as Dave described in the previous slide about how ACOs have evolved. Well, primary care is finally evolving and being recognized for what it is, which we all think is a great thing. And we're poster children for that change in policy. So it's a very exciting time to be doing the work we're doing, and very opportunistic, I should add.
Okay, that's so fascinating. Thanks, Gary. So let's go into a little bit more detail about the direct contracting.
So like I said before, direct contracting is the next gen. And as is typical for the Innovation Center, it'll be a 5-year model test. And it has several different tracks to it, which makes it really interesting. So the first track is what they're calling the professional track. And this is one that is sort of a new addition to the spectrum of ACO models. And it's really an attempt to get players into the field who maybe have not been in two-sided risk before. And so it's about 50% risk, so a little bit lower risk than some of the other models out there, but still two-sided risk.
When we say direct contracting, how is that contrasting from what it was before? Who is it contracting with?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so it's a little bit of a misnomer because it's not direct contracting the way some people think of it. It's not concierge medicine. It really is an entity. So in this case, it would be the direct contracting entity, which could be, a group of doctors. It could be a health system. It could be any organization coming together to coordinate care for beneficiaries. And that organization is contracting with CMS. In the second track of the new direct contracting model, it's 100%, they're calling it 100% capitation or total care capitation, where while a doc is still going to submit claims because that's what's used for CMS tracking, the ACO is going to receive full payment and is going to be responsible for making payment to the doctors on those claims. That's sort of the biggest shift here, along with some of the other things that go along with it, like, the ability to do more, to offer incentives to beneficiaries to receive the care they need, and, changes to quality measures to make it less burdensome on doctors. So there's some other changes there too, but from a financial perspective, it really is this payment mechanism.
From financial, the direct contracting then really means the payments come into the entity has to pay out the participants.
Yeah, that's correct in the global. Yeah. So in the professional track, the providers will still be receiving payments from CMS. That's in the lower 7% capitated. And then that entity, then outside of CMS, that entity contracts with providers, so primary care providers, specialists, so to create sort of a network, right? And it's not a network in the sense that beneficiaries are locked into those providers. They still have freedom of choice, but those are the providers that make up the ACO's world.
So in the village idea, Dave, in the village model with our local markets, it would be a very logical thing for us to do the analysis, present it to our local markets as to what's the best path for them to potentially pursue in one of these models. That Village is the right place at the right time at that intersection of policy and opportunity.
Yep. And just to tie a bow on this direct contracting conversation before we move on, I don't want to overlook just mentioning very briefly the third and final track of direct contracting, even though we're not going to get into it in detail today. And it's what they're calling geographic, where a direct contracting entity will go into a geographic region and take on risk or responsibility for all of the beneficiaries in that region. And they can do so with either 50% risk or 100% risk. And so that's also sort of a brand new variation of this ACO world. That's still in development by the agency and in its early stages. So definitely more to come on that in the future.
The geographic is a fantastic concept. Lots of detail that are going to have to work out there. I know they put out a request for comment, I think, didn't they?
They did,
yep. And we will be commenting.
Yep. So so Village submitted comments in response. It's a really interesting idea, but it's still in its earlier stages of development. So much more to come on geographic.
It's a great idea. So interesting. People have been talking about it for years. I'm sure you're glad it's not your job as CMS to figure out all the details of that.
Very, very.
It's going to be challenging. I mean, don't get me started with problems. But it could be great. I understand the point, but it's going to be hard to figure out.
So let me talk for a second about the primary care first model, which, as I said, is the other new model that was announced. And once again, it's a 5-year test, and it's really focused on primary care practices, just as the way the comprehensive primary care model was. And what's new and different about this model is that the practices will receive a monthly population-based payment, so an upfront, almost capitated type of payment. The doctors will receive a flat per visit fee as well for every time they see a patient. So again, the idea is to give them the tools they need to coordinate care, to let them take the focus off having many visits in trying to increase volume and take the time they need with the patient. The other thing that's really cool and different about this model is that the performance-based payments that are available is sort of a multi-step process based on quality performance, mostly revolving around acute hospital admissions. And so in the performance-based adjusted payment, they could receive up to 50% additional revenue, but also be responsible for 10% risk if the costs increase. Part of this model is an option that could either be done in conjunction with what I just mentioned or separate, which is to take on care for the seriously ill population. And in that model, it's similar, but you get a much higher upfront per beneficiary per month payment. So a much larger upfront amount of money, idea being that this is a patient that really needs care coordinated, that has chronic, multiple chronic conditions and really needs a lot more attention immediately. And that's for a 12-month period. So the idea is that after 12 months, high-intensity program, the beneficiary will then just be sort of part of the normal population and won't be such a seriously ill or at-risk beneficiary.
I'm excited to see what impact. It'll take us a while to understand the consequence, but it's exciting to think about providers wanting to have seriously ill patients, because that's what we, need to fix in our healthcare system is the small number of patients that have the largest cost.
That fits really well into the Village at Home model, which is suggesting that at home is another primary care delivery point other than in the office, and for very sick patients that may not be able to get out of the home so quickly or have behavioral health challenges which don't allow them also to get out of the home, will be able to come to their house with primary care and take care of them. So that is another thing we're looking at as an opportunity going forward.
Yep. And the final thing I'd say about these models is that obviously we're hitting them at a very high level today, and there's a lot of exciting elements to them. But with all of these programs, the devil really is in the details. And so there's still a lot that we still need to see from CMS about how the financial methodology is constructed.
Okay, can you talk to us a little about timelines when we have to submit a letter of intent and, the next steps in moving forward?
Sure, happy to. So for the direct contracting model, the letter of intent period is open now, and so entities that want to participate will need to submit a letter of intent by August 2nd, but it's a non-binding letter of intent. So the idea is just for the agency to be able to sort of gauge interest in the model. We don't know an exact date, but I think sometime in August we'll see the application released for the model, with the application then being due in October, and models being selected DCEs being selected for participation in the model in the November timeframe, and then signing, the DCE would sign an agreement with CMS in December, and the model would go live in 2020. Now, the caveat to the go live in January 2020 is that the first year of this model, they're actually calling performance year 0 because it's a ramp-up year. And there won't actually be any of the financial mechanisms or payments at work in that first year. And that first year will just be used for, an ACO to be able to get its systems in order, to do voluntary alignment, and to have a beneficiary base for the following year that would supplement the claims-based alignment. And so that's sort of a key part of this timeline. For the primary care first model, it's a similar timeline, except there's no letter of intent. So it'll just be the application period, and the application should be released any day now by CMS. My guess is certainly by the end of June, with about a 60-day period for applicants to apply to the model. Then at the end of the summer, beginning of the fall is when CMS will make selections for participants. And then again, it'll be the November, December timeframe for having an agreement to review and to execute for a January start date. Unlike the direct contracting model, the payments for the primary care first model will begin in April.
Gary and Dave, this is so helpful. Thank you both for joining us. Those of you that are watching along, you can see they've prepared this compare and contrast between the two options, which is so helpful. I think it's important for everyone to know, if you haven't caught on, it's a great time to be working with VillageMD. And if you're listening and you want to work with VillageMD, give us a call. But I can't help but ask you, Dave, because it's not every day that Working Smarter has a former CMS official on our guest panel. What was it like to work at CMS? Can you spill a little tea for us?
Sure. So the Innovation Center really is what its name implies. It's not like any other place I've ever been around federal government. It is, rooms of really smart minds, people who have been in the space for a long time, and also really young, bright minds out of grad school, sitting in rooms, writing on the walls, brainstorming ideas, and thinking about how they can really push healthcare forward. And so there's this energy in the development of models, which is really, really fun. And the flip side, and so that's the cool part, right? And then the flip side that I think a lot of people don't see on the other side is, and now that I'm on the other side, I feel this as well, right, is the guessing of what's going on. And I know that can be very frustrating sometimes, and there's these periods and gaps where we're not hearing anything from the agency, and it's not because they're not listening, and it's not because they're not doing anything, but to make sure that the models come out in a really, well-conceived, well-thought-through manner. There's a very long process internally for review and going back and forth and making sure that they're really good, sustainable models.
There's so much in the press about the current administration, and it's very hard to know what's real and what impact do you think that's having at CMS?
I think that, it obviously has some impact, because just as the way, we hear things in the news or in the media, the CMS staff leaders and staff team members, they hear the same thing. And so that can be tough, but I also don't think it really impacts them on a day-to-day basis. The people there are really driven by, really believe in what they're doing.
What we don't see every day through this administration, the hard work that is being done by people like David in the administration today, who don't really get bothered by all the clamor and all the chatter of, what's going on in the political process. They're heads down, usually in the weeds, figuring out these type of issues. People have to deal with the blatant uncertainty that can change moment by moment in this current administration.
Again, such a pleasure to have a chance to talk with you both, and thank you for sharing your expertise on these important CMS changes. I feel like we could talk all day about these, but unfortunately we have to. I wish we could. I hope you'll come back, and in the meantime, I'm going to send you guys a definition of spilling tea, so next time maybe we can get some real juicy gossip, but maybe not. You're so professional. Again, thanks to both of you for your leadership on this issue on behalf of Village, and also for helping our listeners understand the program. And really hope to have you back as this evolves, to keep us updated on how things are going. Thanks so much.
Perfect. Thank you.
That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you to our sponsor, Village MD. We hope you will join us for future concise compliance conversations.